Okay, well, let's go ahead and jump in. I know we have two new board members. Are they both here? So we now have a complete advisory board. I don't know, Craig or Jody, did you want to introduce those two new members?
Sure. It looks like we have one of them. I
Okay.
don't think we have the commissioner here, but welcome, Melissa Lacasse, and would love with Tanbark Molded Fiber Products, and would love to have you just tell us a word about yourself, and we'll make sure that you have background information on everyone else as well. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Excited to dive in. For those who don't know, Tambark is a type 3 molded fiber producer that started about 3 years ago in Saco, Maine. We're trying to take a Maine heritage industry, which is producing packaging and products out of molded fiber, and bring it into the 21st century. It really stopped innovating or being much of a industry in the 50s and 60s when single-use plastic came along. And so Tambark is looking to provide access for companies who want lower volume access, but also just figure out how to take the process and innovate with it so it can close the performance gap with plastic. Very excited about this. And I serve on the forestry technology sector as the representative for Maine Technology Institute as well. So there's some overlap there.
Wonderful. And we do have Commissioner Duguay from the Department of Economic and Community Development, and perhaps he'll be joining us later today. But was very excited to be joining this board. So you'll see more of him in the future.
Okay. Great. Well, maybe I'll just start with a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. So we're going to start off with a presentation on forestry needs and trends. And then some coverage of a discussion of the benchmarking report that was completed to inform our process. And then we'll also hear more about the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Fund. And then after that, Jody will introduce what we've been kind of thinking about for format and focus of future meetings. And we'll have a few minutes for public comment. And before the meeting ends, we'll wrap up with a few logistical decisions that we need to make as a group. Any comments or questions on any of that before we jump in? Okay. So we have Matt Hoffner here from Maine Technology Institute to get us started with a presentation on some of the needs and trends in the forest industry. Hi, Matt.
How are you?
Good. So feel free to jump right in. I don't know if you need to share your screen or great.
It's coming. Let me just ask, are you looking at the full slide or my note slide?
Full slide.
Great. Then we'll get started. I'm going to move that. First of all, thanks for the opportunity. My time here today is really a follow-up to the presentation that Claire Hawkins made at the last meeting regarding the ARPA funds that were distributed through agriculture. And we were asked to provide similar data for the ARPA funds that we distributed through the forestry programs that MTI managed during the pandemic. I realize I have 20 minutes, so I have just a handful of slides that I'm going to move through pretty quickly, which will hopefully give us a little bit of time for questions at the end. So please stop me along the way. If you have questions, I've got time built into our system to answer. So let me just start with a brief agenda. I've included a little bit of background on MTI and how we got involved with the ARPA funding, especially the forestry funds. I'd also like to provide some data on the MTI support for forestry and agriculture from our non-ARPA core funding over the last few years. And finally, I've got a slide that kind of shares some of the lessons learned from our work during ARPA and our core funding. I think most people here are familiar with MTI, Maine Technology Institute. Our mission is to support innovation in the 7 sectors shown, which obviously include both forestry and agriculture. In the last 25 years, we've distributed about $372 million to these 7 sectors. And since most MTI programs require matching funds of at least 1-to-1, that $372 million was matched by $2.2 billion in private capital. When the pandemic struck in early 2020, there were a number of federal programs that were created, including the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, which was signed into law in March of 2021. By October of that year, Maine had created the Maine Jobs and Recovery Program, and the state legislature passed LD 1733 that divvied up that $1 billion into 112 different programs. MTI was tasked with managing 8 of those programs, getting that money out to the small clients, and forestry was a high priority for us. So that first program was called Forest Recovery Initiative Phase 1, or FIR1, and it actually went live 30 days after the MJRP process was defined. We accepted applications through January of 2022. Those applications were reviewed in February of 2022, and we were able to get the funds out the door in March and April of 2022. So relatively quick. It was one of the first ARPA programs that got money into the hands of small business. $6 million or $20 million was allocated by the state legislature for forestry, and FRI1 was $6 million of that. The program was non-competitive, which meant that if you were a business in that industry and you had less than 250 employees, you could apply for immediate assistance if you could also articulate the damage that the pandemic did to your business. So we worked to make the online application relatively simple. We published it in multiple languages. We did weekly seminars to answer questions, and those seminars were attended by 25 or 30 people each week. And there were a number of follow-up one-on-ones for people that were struggling with the application. We also got great cooperation from the forestry organizations in the state. They promoted it to their membership, and it was very, very effective. We got great response from people that were members of the 2 large organizations in the state. So let's just take a look at the results. We received 217 applications for funding. Unfortunately, 2 companies actually closed business during the month that we were processing the applications. So we made 215 awards. The average award was $27,500. So the total awards was about $6 million. However, as we have seen with other ARPA programs, and I think Claire pointed this out in her presentation last month as well, the amount of funds that were requested from this group was 3 times higher than the available funding. The clients that were in FRI1 were relatively small. You can see that there was only 6.9 full-time equivalent employees per account. But when you look at the 215 accounts that received funding, it's almost 1,500 workers in the space that were affected by the program. How were the funds used? So we took our AI agent at MTI and we asked it to look at the project titles that were submitted on the 215 applications that we processed and awarded. And AI summarized those projects into 5 categories. 2 of the major issues that were facing the industry at this stage of the pandemic was lack of available parts. You may recall we had significant supply disruptions, and it forced operators to keep larger than normal inventories of parts. That represented about 32% of the total. The other major challenge that foresters had, and people in the industry had at that time, was finding workers, which required that they have immediate increases in wages and benefits. And so about 30% of our funding went to increased wages and benefits. Truck and equipment maintenance was third at 23%. And with sky-high diesel prices at that time, operators began to invest in fuel-efficient equipment as well. That was about 10%. The last category was purchasing equipment and masks and portable partitions and things like that to comply with the pandemic safety measures. What's also interesting is that approximately 15 months after we put the money out, and that was March and April of 2022, we did a follow-up survey to determine the economic impact of our funding. The survey indicated that since the low point in April of 2022, the industry began to rebound with increases in revenue, increases in profit, and increases in hiring. It's also interesting to note that the companies reported back to us that 38% of their employees that could have been laid off during this pandemic without the FRI1 award were actually retained on payroll. So it had a very positive impact in terms of keeping people on payroll. In terms of the economic impact, 50% of the funding that we put out was for equipment, supplies, parts, pandemic safety gear, things like that. And when we asked the awardees where they spent that money, 83% of those purchases were from main vendors. So you can see that the economic impact was more than just the companies that were the awardees. It was where they spent the money and how they spent the money that had a positive impact on the Maine economy. The last question that we had in the economic impact survey was an open text question, and we asked the awardees to tell us how important the ARPA award was, the Forestry Recovery grant was. And then we used AI to read and summarize those 200 responses into this one paragraph. And you can see in that last sentence that in general, the grant served as a lifeline. And that word lifeline was used over and over again by the awardees who answered this question. So I think that they perceived it, they used the money quickly to shore up their business and promote some growth and ensure payroll stability during those difficult economic times. Next. I won't spend a lot of time on the second phase of the Forest Recovery Initiative program, which we called FRI2. And FRI2, the awards were made in December of 2022, and the funds went out in 2023. These were very large grants to very large organizations that were developing new technology that used Maine natural resources, or they made significant upgrades in productivity or efficiency to their existing operation. You can see in the next slide the profile for these awards. Only 23 awards were made of the 48 applications that we received. It was a competitive bid, but those awards averaged $687,000 per award. So we put out almost $16 million in FRI2. Again, there was a 3-to-1 ratio on the requested dollars versus the available dollars. And obviously, these were significantly larger accounts, 132 employees per business. The total FTE impacted by FRI2 was over 3,000 employees. Because there were only 23, I can list them, and I'm not planning on spending any time going through this list, but these are the companies that received FRI2 funding from MTI. You can see it ranges from 275 up to 900,000. And these are very large companies with very large projects. Here's the remaining companies, including new technology, especially for biorefineries and biochar plants in the state. The final section of data that I'd like to provide an insight into is the awards that we make to forestry and agriculture for applications that we received for MTI core funding. So this is not ARPA funds. This is money that comes from the state legislature as part of a yearly stipend that we receive. I want to just review 2 applications because it kind of tells the story of what we see at MTI when we receive forestry and agriculture applications. These 2 applications were received within the last year. One was a funding request by a potato farmer in the county who needed to build new storage facilities for his farm. The second application was for a new agricultural drone company in Knox County. who modified the drone to carry heavier payloads. And then he mounted a special spectral analysis camera on the drone that could survey the field and identify minor changes in leaf color to determine those sections of the field that may require fertilizer or herbicide or fungicide. And obviously that spot application really saves the farmer thousands of dollars in supplies. So I have no doubt that that potato farmer needed the new storage facility in the county. But at MTI, when we read the application, we were unable to find a lot of innovation in that project. So we did not make an award to that deserving business. The Ag Drone Company did receive a grant of $100,000 for further growth and development. So that's just an example of the innovation that we look for in the normal applications that we receive for the core funding. We have had 25 applications awarded over the period 2021 through 2025. And you can see that a little over $2 million was awarded, with an average award slightly higher in forestry than it was in agriculture. Last slide I've got is just a little bit of lessons learned, what we have learned about specifically giving money in the forestry field as well as the agricultural field. First, let me just start out with the results of one question that was in the economic impact survey. And we asked the awardees what was their number one concern and the number one challenge for their business going forward out of 7 options that we gave them. And the number one concern was the rising interest rates. So we are continually looking at the interest rates for MTI loans. It's currently set at 5%, which is a pretty good deal. And we also offer very flexible payment terms. So this is something that we will continue. It has been brought to our board for their endorsement that we continue the low rate, because it certainly gives an advantage to the small businesses that need some relief in terms of the high interest rate. We also learned that, especially in the small companies, and those are primarily in the forestry and agricultural business, that they lack administrative support, they might lack some technical sophistication, and the application needs to be very, very simple. We worked really hard during the ARPA process on all those weekly Zoom calls to help people with some basic assistance in how to log on and how to do an online application. So going forward, we know that if we're going to be serving the forestry and ag business with additional funding, we need to make sure that that application is very simple. We also learned that in addition to money, sometimes what these businesses need is technical support, either expert business support or experienced business people to offer some business support. So we have an entrepreneur in residence program at MTI that we can put experts in touch with these businesses. And we also created 2 years ago the Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corps, which is a database of experts in multiple fields across the state of Maine. And if you use one of these consultants, MTI will provide half the funding for your consulting program. That has been wildly successful, much more successful than we ever anticipated when we started it 2 years ago. The last lesson learned for us is that as much as surveys are a pain in the neck for everybody to create and manage, when we do those for the economic impact analysis, and we do the survey approximately a year after the money has gone out, we got some great insights as to how the money was used, what the impact was, and what the programs should look like going forward to meet the needs and the future needs and the challenges of this forestry and agricultural business. So we would continue to do that as part of our normal business. In fact, we've got economic impact analysis done now for 7 of the 8 programs that we were asked to manage as part of ARPA. And with that, I'll finish and open it up if there's any questions. Jody, I guess I can pass this back to you.
Thank you so much. Very, very helpful information. And I'm going to turn it over to our co-chair.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Does anyone, we have a couple of minutes left. If anyone has any questions for Matt, I was also going to say, because our timing is tight today, that if there are any questions that come up after this meeting for any of these presentations, feel free to email them to me and Jody and Senator Hickman, and we can make sure that things get responses.
May I ask one question?
Yeah,
If
of
that's
course.
okay.
Mhm.
Do they only deal with for-profit businesses, or they just deal with both for-profit and non-profits?
Well, it's a good question. In fact, most of our businesses are trying to make money, but many of them are not. They're startups and they are in a loss position. So, in addition, we support many of the organizations that support agriculture or those 7 sector industries. So I think last year we put out almost $1.5 million to $2 million for ecosystem support. These are the organizations that support business that align with our mission. So, no, you do not need to be a profitable business, but you do need to be in one of the 7 sectors or supporting one of the 7 sectors in order to apply for MTI funding.
Will you go over the 7 sectors if you don't mind, please?
Yeah, they were in the second slide. And Jody, are copies of this slide available to everybody already? As part of
Not already, but in the next
will be?
meeting
Okay,
packet, we will
great.
be including your slides. So
Okay.
we'll get that out
And of
to-
course, it's also on the website at MTI under Who Do We Serve? So
Okay, thank you so
the
much.
list
I
of 7
appreciate
sectors
it.
is there.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Matt. I think especially seeing that economic impact assessment for the awards is really helpful as we're thinking through some of our next steps and how we'll be proceeding with this funding.
Great.
I think just given the time, it probably makes sense for us to move on to conversation around the benchmarking report. You should all have copies of that went out in the board packet. And Eric DeLuca is here to talk to us about that.
Thanks. I'm going to let Erica open up to give us the big picture, and then we'll start zooming in on the details.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Erica Campbell from In Common Group, and I am going to start the presentation today and then pass it over to Eric. Let me get it in full slideshow. And can I just get a quick thumbs up that that's good? Excellent. We're going to be talking about a benchmarking study from 3 different states and their funds. But I just wanted to quickly talk about the full project. So we are working with DACF and CEI to support the development of this fund with a series of research projects. One was the existing resources and description of capital, different types of capital. And we went through that in an earlier meeting. And now we're talking today about the state benchmarking report. We are also going to be conducting a series of interviews, and I know Jody sent out a link to schedule, and thank you all for starting to sign up for that. And we will send out the brief interview question guide ahead of time, so y'all have a little bit of a heads up around that. We also have sent out a survey, which is up on the DACF website, and we already have over 100 responses. And there's 2 different surveys, one for food and farm and forestry products businesses, and then also for capital and TA providers. So we'll be conducting the interviews and the survey and analyzing those. And then we'll also be working with the advisory board on an evaluation and metrics framework. So the dates are right there, and Jody will keep you all up to date on that. And then we'll have a final report wrapping everything together in September. So I'm going to pass it on over to Eric to finish out sharing about the state fund benchmarking report.
Thanks, Erica. And Erica is going to help me out with advancing slides. Really excited to be with you folks. I continue to be thrilled about the work that you're doing, and so happy to be with you. As an alumnus of the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Board, I know how exciting and energizing this work can be, and how impactful it can be. So we're looking today at the benchmarking report, and what you see right now is the table of contents for the report that you received in your packet. You'll notice that we looked at 3 states, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Vermont, and we looked at them across a range of different aspects and considerations, which largely emerged from the interviews I did with a range of different stakeholders. You'll notice there's a section at the end called appendices, which you don't see in the packet, and that was just in the interest of how much space we took up in the meeting packet. One of those does outline the folks that I interviewed and considerations around them. Another one gives links to a couple of additional state-based programs that might be relevant to you. There's one in Washington State and one in Oregon. And then there's also a little bit more detail on each of the 3 state programs. But you have a lot of that in what you've received, and we'll see more of it in this deck, which I'm assuming you'll be able to access. Go ahead, Erica. So these first couple of slides give an overview, and don't get worried or feel overwhelmed by the amount of information. This is just giving you a snapshot of each of the state programs, and I'm not going to go through it in great detail. In fact, I'm just going to say a couple of high-level things in each case just to help us build a through line. And having been in your seat for a number of years, I was on the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Board from its inception for 9 years until the term limit. Really thinking in terms of what is on your minds and the things you'll face as you move forward in shaping and moving the program forward. And one of the things that struck me about this food security infrastructure grant in Massachusetts is their approach to evaluation and how it impacts the way they design their scoring for the upcoming grant. They've got a grant round right now where the request for response is out. It's going to close in about a week. And it is building on the $108 million that they've put out before, which they did in a relative hurry. There was an emphasis in the early years on getting the money out the door, originally through ARPA funds, and then the state has picked up the momentum on that coming into the last couple of years. And so as they began to get more space to analyze what happened with those programs, as we saw Claire do last time with AIIP in Maine, that informed the way they designed the scoring metrics. And so their priorities such as social equity showed up in the way they designed their evaluation metrics. And so 30% of the current scoring is focused on impact. And within that, they have 2 categories that really center social equity. Each are grounded in a specifically defined term. One is a state-defined term of an environmental justice neighborhood, and then the other is a federally defined term of a socially disadvantaged individual. So you can see how they ground that in, and then it fits into the scoring rubric. Go ahead, Erica. So with Michigan, I think one of the things that I believe is interesting is the way they do their application process. They've got 2 levels, and they activate the economic development folks within the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development that are spread out across the state in different geographic regions to be liaisons to potential applicants, so that the applicants are getting some feedback on whether this is a proposal that's worth moving forward, and a preliminary application may come out of that interaction that would then go to the State Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. And then full applications that move forward from there go to a small commission, a 5-person commission that's appointed by the governor of folks like you that play key roles in the broader ecosystem, and the final decisions are made there. So it's a two-tiered process that really engages economic development support on the front end. So that's something that I found interesting there. Go ahead, Erica. With the Vermont program, Ellen's going to talk in more detail on this, and Ellen is the executive director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, but she also has an ex officio role by statute on the Working Lands Enterprise Board and has been there since the beginning, and so really has that full perspective, even more than I do, since I was there at the beginning, but not all the way through to today. So just building on the theme that I raised with Michigan about how, go ahead one more, Erica, if you can. Oops.
I guess I'm having a
lost-
little bit of technical difficulty. Sorry about that.
That's
Let's see.
okay. We'll give it one more try. Yeah, if you can just go one more slide.
Yeah,
if
it's
it works.
it's
frozen.
unfortunately, it's not advancing for me.
Do you want to
screen
refresh the
seems to
browser?
be- Yeah, so sorry about that.
I can tell this story without the slide
Okay.
anyway, and we get the tech back. But anyway, one of the things that Vermont does that's similar to what I was describing with Michigan is to have an initial phase within the application process that's a letter of intent. And so it's as we were hearing in the previous presentation, making it very simple for folks to express interest. And that gives a sense among the board and the staffing of the program, what's out there and the level of financial and number of application interest that they're going to see. And one of the things that's interesting about that is you could go back if you can, but if you can't, don't worry about it. The opportunity to calibrate the number of applications that are going to receive a full review and the total dollar amount that is going to be looked at in terms of ask and actual dollars out the door. And the reason I think that's interesting is because when you think about the AIIP analysis, and Claire is with us and knows much more about it than I do, but one thing that was notable to me was the 58% of projects that were not completed, and then also the very high dollar amount of total ask. And so what I think is interesting, and this shows up on the ground with the businesses as well, that really calibrating the understanding of demand, whether it's how well a business on the ground understands their demand when they're proposing a use for a project, or how well the program understands its demand when it's calibrating its approach to funding, makes a big difference. And so one of the things that the Working Lands Enterprise Board is able to do using this letter of intent phase is to calibrate a ratio that they believe is best, and it tends to kind of pencil out around 3-to-1. And so the full applications that are going to be reviewed is basically like 3 times the total dollar amount of what's going to be awarded. And so that's giving you a quality funnel for everybody's time and attention, how much time the applicant has to put into making that full application, how much time the review process, which Ellen may go over in more detail, all those folks have to do in that review. And then what's also interesting about it is that folks that either don't move forward at the LOI phase or who aren't awarded after a full application can be directed toward a range of potential business technical assistance resources. And what we've seen over time is that folks that get a no at one point in time may come back with a stronger application in the future, and oftentimes come in with an application that relates just to their business, and maybe in the future coming in with a more robust, broader scale application that actually has supply chain impact. So there's a lot of value and intelligence that can be drawn from having these touch points along the way with applications. So I'll stop there. Go ahead, Erica. So this is a range of things that came up in interviews that specifically relate to putting the fund together and implementing it. One of the things that came up, we talked to ecosystem-based funds and also state funds, and they had versions of this kind of advisory board of different stripes. And one of the things that folks mentioned was how having clear expectations and clear roles for you folks is a real big success factor, so that everybody can experience themselves as successful, and we can make the best use of everybody's limited time, and also the on-the-ground awareness and knowledge you have about your specific sectors and your role in your value chains. when we ask capital providers, this is kind of a little joke, you get a range of different capital providers in the room and you say, well, what's the most impactful financial instrument that, among all the different ways you folks can deploy funds? And they often answer it's business technical assistance. So it's always funny when the money people come in and say the thing that's going to make the biggest difference is the business technical assistance. But another thing that they have said is that the grants really are a best and highest use of public funds, because not a lot of folks out there can give grants to businesses, and then those grants can mitigate risks for other stakeholders in various ways, whether it's a business that might have a CapEx opportunity, but they might be on the fence about whether to take that risk of putting that money down, but this money can get them to take the action that then has the broader supply chain impact. Similarly, whether these funds are showing up on the balance sheet of the business or showing up in the way they function on the ground, that can mitigate some of the risk for a lender or other capital provider who's doing this every day. And so it can be an attractor for additional funds from other sources, which then increases the leverage and matching impact that this program can demonstrate to its stakeholders. The last thing I'll mention here is that the funds have different approaches to payment. There's reimbursement-based funds, and then there's also funds that pay out across milestones, including potentially at the signing of the initial contract. And so if you do it that way, then you folks can get moving with dollars without having to put up all the money on their own. And then if you have milestones, the program is getting pieces of information along the way, and they can know earlier if a project is going sideways or if there's some other consideration that might come up. But it's also more of an administrative version. The folks that are doing the reimbursement-based programs might be asking a business to put $100,000 on the table and then do a bunch of stuff and then get paid. And one of the things we've seen, which I'll mention a little bit later, is that other ecosystem partners can come in with things like bridge loans that can help with that gap, because it can be a social equity issue. If you're asking, so we'll give you a grant as long as you can write a $100,000 check today. And so I'll touch on that a little bit more later. You can go ahead, Erica. So that theme of public-private partnerships comes up in a range of different ways. Ellen's organization, the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, plays a background role across two different networks in the broader working lands economy, both in the forest sector and in the food sector. And they have used the collective impact model that was publicized through Stanford Social Innovation Review in the 2010s, that has 5 different components of how to support this level of collective impact on the ground. And so one of the things you see that is really notable is if you've got a network of 400 organizations that are all rallying around the same goals and structured in a way to support the implementation of those goals, you can get a much higher likelihood of moving forward towards those goals over time. And then with the application process for a program like this, you can peg the application criteria to those goals and have people, just like they're going to map their project to this program's explicit goals by statute, also to some of these on the ground goals in the specific sectors. And as I mentioned, another way that this can be helpful that we saw in Massachusetts is folks with the Massachusetts Food Trust Program, which works with a community development finance institution and a community development corporation to provide bridge loans, and with a partnership with the State Department of Agricultural Resources to mitigate that upfront cost for folks. And they have a way of structuring that and a way of managing the relationship between the food trust partner and the program itself. And so these are things that can show up. There's I won't go into it now in the interest of time, but I may mention it slightly later, different approaches that Michigan uses as well for these type of ecosystem partnerships that helps to move everything forward and can help this program and the state agencies to really focus their work on where their impact is not only directly highest, but also in terms of leveraging these other system components. Go ahead, Erica. So from all the conversations, 3 core strategic themes emerge, and I believe Ellen's going to pick up on these a little bit through the Vermont lens in particular. This notion that food system development and working lands development, including forest products, is economic development is an important thing to land in folks' minds, and there's a bunch of different ways to emphasize that, and the fact that the leader from DECD is in this team and moving forward engaged here creates a lot of opportunity, in addition to folks like Claire within DACF that are focusing on economic development that can help to make that case and shine a light on that. Because with the legislature and other stakeholders grounding that in data points, like I'll just say one, for example, here that came out of Vermont's work, that we had somebody from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development who noticed going through the program data that $10,000 of program funds on the ground was yielding 1 FTE, which is an impact that you just don't see very often. And so that showed up in a couple of annual reports, and it really got people's attention. This came up already. Oh, sorry. The important role of technical assistance, I touched on it earlier, and as a risk mitigator, but also as a way to support both the viability of the business now and the sustainability of the business over time. And there are a range of different ways that folks calibrate their approach to that, including emphasizing one-on-one business technical assistance and also networks of providers. And lastly, the network connectivity and integrated capital, which is blending a range of different kinds of capital resources, potentially from different folks in a capital stack, to mix the business technical assistance with potentially grants and or loans and or investment, whatever is the best fit. Some of the folks in this field use a local cobbler metaphor, and saying rather than it being Cinderella and everybody's trying to sort of squeeze their foot into one slipper, that you go to the local cobbler and the capital stack and the structure of the integrated capital is designed to meet the needs of the business. Go ahead, Erica. So I won't spend much time on this slide, but just to highlight how the economic development lens can be helpful both in the goals, and again, we've got goals by statute and then potentially on the ground goals across value chains, the way the program approaches its work, and then also in the impact analysis. And then, as I mentioned earlier, through the communication that comes out of the impact analysis. Go ahead, Erica. So here's a few details that came up within that. The lessons learned that map to the economic development side of things, and I'll just mention one. This idea of market demand signals really made a big difference in terms of project success. This came up in some of the Massachusetts narratives. When you look at a project that reached its objectives and one that didn't, the accurate understanding of market demand signals was the deciding factor. And as I mentioned, it's a program level opportunity as well. And partnering strongly with the economic development folks in your orbit will help with understanding what the demand signals are across specific industries, and then also with calibrating how to approach the review and evaluation of applications. Go ahead, Erica. I think we covered this. Why don't you keep going? So these are a couple of things that can be done that relate to creating opportunities for businesses. One of the things that Vermont has that Ellen may highlight further is a trade show grant program that can give small amounts of money to businesses to get them in front of markets that they wouldn't otherwise access. And then looking at a business through its particular stage of development and calibrating the technical assistance to that stage of development makes a really big difference, especially with the smaller folks. If you're looking at measurements and metrics that are kind of beyond their scope, they can come out feeling like they're never going to get there. And so really understanding how to tailor both the technical assistance and the evaluation of applications to the stage of development and scale and market makes a big difference. Go ahead, Erica. I mentioned the network connectivity before, and I'll just give a quick example from Michigan. In addition to the state fund, there is a land-grant university that has a Center for Regional Food Systems, Michigan State University, and they've been involved in a lot of public-private partnerships, for example, bringing down USDA Regional Food System Network development grants to work in an area that also received foundation funding from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation that's based in the state, and then also Economic Development Administration funding from the federal government. And so the similar thing happens with the Michigan Good Food Fund, where you've got an anchor organization, the Fair Food Network, and then works with an array of lenders and also folks on the ground that are specifically grounded in socially disadvantaged communities to help build those bridges so that people can see the fund as being for them. And then whether it's providing the business technical assistance or other forms of resources, including some of the capital and capital matching, to help those folks really see themselves in the program and avail themselves of the funds. Go ahead. I think we covered that. So thanks so much. And again, the reason I was just picking one or two things to say about each aspect of the report is to save some time for you. So I believe we've got about 10 minutes, and Erica's going to come back and join us, and she'll field your questions and help us get a conversation going. And I'm here to respond and happy to answer any questions, or really interested in your thoughts or anything you'd like to hear more about.
Thanks so much, Eric. Trisha, just a quick time check. Do we have five more minutes or 10?
We have until 1:25 for this conversation.
Great.
We could also, we'll have extra time also after Ellen speaks.
Okay, great. Well, we'd really like to hear from board members. Obviously, if you have any questions for Eric and the research that he did on the other states, and Ellen will be able to provide a more thorough understanding of the Vermont Working Lands Fund. Also, is there, other things that you think are relevant or useful for the development of the fund, and what may be missing that you'd like to know more about from these state funds, or perhaps even other states, and what questions do you have?
Melissa?
So we're doing the Q&A now, right? We're not supposed to submit. Okay.
Yeah.
So really great presentation. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I noted that you talked about food systems being economic development. They most certainly are. I did notice in the analysis, Vermont was the only state that also incorporated forestry like we are. So I want to just make sure that we also include forestry in that being an economic development tool as well.
Yeah, and I mentioned the forestry and the verbal with the economic development thing, but one thing to note is with the Michigan program, there are a range of forest projects that were funded, and I believe we listed that in the full report, but we certainly have that information, and there is a dynamic online tool that they gave us that you have as well, that enables you to see the range of different grants by year and by category. And so there's a way to see that, but it's a very important point. And there's a range of things that Vermont did to support the development of the forest sector, both on the business technical assistance side and on the network and community development side that Ellen may touch on. So thank you for emphasizing that.
Great, thank you. I'll check out the Michigans.
Nicholas and then Claire.
Yeah, thanks. So Eric, I kind of picked up something between the first presentation on the forestry programs and then your presentation, which are a little incongruous as I see it. So the forestry presentation emphasized from their findings, keeping applications simple and recognizing especially small businesses are limited in administrative capacity or maybe expertise. And to me, that's kind of incongruous with some of your findings that you recommend or highlighted. Some of these programs have a two-step application process. Like first you have to put in a letter of intent and then you apply if you're accepted to that, or a multi-stage awarding payment. Like you get the RFSI right now, equipment only, you get 70% and then you get 20% and then you get the final 10%. Do you see those kind of application and administrative points compatible with each other, or what? I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, the letter intent for folks that use that is defined to be the simplest thing that gives the majority of people the quickest thing to do. And then when you are taking more time, then it's more likely to be useful. I'll stop there just because I don't want to take a ton of time, but if you want to put it in the chat or follow up, I can say more, but I'm just sensitive to time on that. But it is certainly something, especially with the social equity piece I've seen because I do a broader range of financing network work in Vermont now, and focusing within the design of the applications for the simplicity and the focus, as well as the way that if it's a loan, the underwriting criteria are managed, and orienting towards more character base is definitely relevant.
And Eric and Erica, will you be staying on through Ellen's presentation too?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I will, yeah.
Okay. Claire?
Great, thanks. And I recognize I am not a board member and that time is ticking, so I'm going to make this really quick. But a couple folks asked me in the background about sort of my impressions from these first two presentations. And I think one thing that really stood out to me was the importance of technical assistance, not only from the business and administrative perspective, but also from the manufacturing perspective. So if we're going to invest in infrastructure or capital assets, I think it has historically been incredibly important that those projects have free or low-cost access to manufacturing technical assistance. And I think we're all aware that Maine Manufacturing Extension Partnership recently lost a good deal of its funding. And I cannot tell you how many projects we have approved grants for that had Bill Whittier listed as a critical component of making sure that the correct and effective equipment purchases were being made to make sure that facility configuration decisions would end up working in the long run. And so I think ensuring that there's a way for businesses or awardees to access that kind of technical assistance, it will help de-risk infrastructure investments in a way that a lot of other steps can't. So I would just add that to the mix.
That's great. I think we can just take one more question and then maybe we'll group the rest of the questions after Ellen's presentation. Do you want to go ahead,
Go
Jeffrey?
with Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Claire. Appreciate that. Those insights, and Eric, thanks a lot too. This is lots to think about and bring into our discussions later on. I appreciate it. One question I had, and I'm never sure whether the timing for questions and discussions is appropriate, but is around sort of the administrative implications of all this work and making sure that the applications are robust and the goals are being met, and you know, are there any insights for us going into that? And as well, maybe this is a question for Craig or some of the others, is, you know, when does that, you know, fall into our discussion?
So I had a sneak preview of Ellen's deck, and I know she has a slide on that review process, and so I think I'll defer to her on that point from a Vermont perspective, in the interest of time.
Well, why don't we, that is a good question. Why don't we go ahead and jump into Ellen's presentation then? Hi, Ellen. And I think we'll come back to some of these questions hopefully after that.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited that you all are seated in your positions and that you are up and running. As Eric said, I'm Ellen Kaler. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and our organization is named in the statute that created the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Initiative as an ex officio member. And so I have served on the board in the same seats you are all in since it launched in 2012. So going on 15 years. 13 years, whatever that is, yeah. So I have a few slides to walk through, and I'm happy to answer any questions then as well. And hopefully what I've got for you will give you a little bit more sense about what how all this works, since you're just really getting underway with it all. So on Eric's point, around the three themes, I could not agree more. Working land sector development is economic development, whether it's forest products or food systems. There is an absolute importance to the role that technical assistance played, and I'll explain a little bit how that actually manifests with the Working Lands Enterprise Fund. And that component of network connectivity integrated capital is also essential. Components that really help to make it all work, because it provides a lot of that threading together, or that weaving together of technical assistance, business supports, and the larger ecosystem of businesses within a sector, alongside the capital that's provided to businesses to expand their businesses. The other thing that I just want to mention that is also critical to the Vermont situation, and at least half of it is relevant in Maine, is that it is critical to the grant making of the board in Vermont. We situate our understanding of Vermont's food system. It's the foundational document that is the undergirding of our thinking and our way of understanding the food system and its needs is the Vermont Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan, which is a 10-year strategic plan to strengthen Vermont's food system. It also was something that was authorized by the Vermont legislature. It was tasked to the Sustainable Jobs Fund to create. We are on our second 10-year plan. I know Commissioner Beal quite well over the years, and she's aware very much of the plan we have here in Vermont. And then within the last couple of years, we also had what's called the Forest Future Roadmap, which is a 10-year strategic plan for the forest products sector in Vermont. And that too is used as a foundational document to inform the board in its strategic thinking about how best to invest in the forest product economy here in Vermont. And so in Maine, for instance, while you don't have the same kind of food system strategic plan that Vermont and now New Hampshire and Rhode Island may have, you do have your 4 Maine plan for the forest sector, which hopefully is being used to inform the thinking and strategizing of how best to invest Maine dollars in Maine. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have those types of plans that have broad stakeholder engagement in the process, and then a shared sense of ownership of actually implementing the plan. And the way we think about it in Vermont is that, in essence, one of the state's contributions towards the implementation of the goals and the intended outcomes of these plans is by making investments in businesses through the use of state dollars. So they really go hand in hand, and having a plan is very, very useful. So on the same theme of working lands development, sector development is economic development, just a quick overview. The board membership reflects that this is about economic development. There are 3 state agencies that are part of this process, and then there are named ex officio members, and the board positions reflect this view that working land sector development is economic development. The goals of the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative reflects this, as I think you'll see. The design of our annual RFP soliciting grant proposals reflects this. You just take a look at the naming of our grant programs: business enhancement grants, supply chain impact grants, infrastructure investment grants, technical assistance provider grants. Those go to technical assistance providers who are working directly with businesses. So the focus really is on private sector investment, and our performance measures and our intended outcomes also reflect this very strong notion that this is a form of economic development. The vision of the Working Lands Enterprise Fund is that our shared working landscape is the foundation of Vermont's evolving culture, vibrant communities, healthy ecosystems, and a sense of place. And we recently updated our mission statement to make strategic investments and develop policy recommendations that support a resilient and sustainable farm, food, and forest economy in Vermont. And just to give you a sense of scale, as a state, as you know, we're very small. We only have 640 or 50,000 people. Our state budget is, I think, somewhere in the $8 to $9 million range. But over the 12-year period of the last 12 years of grant making, the state of Vermont has contributed $8.8 million of state funds to this initiative, and that has gone out to 555 projects across the state. It has leveraged an additional $30.9 million in matching funds. And as Eric mentioned, there's a ratio of funding awards to of funds requested of about 1 to 3. So for every $1 requested, there's about, every $1 funded, there's about $3 requested in support. Now, the board has an operating plan that it's developed and every few years updates. And this is a really helpful document because it basically provides almost like an SOP around how does the board function. And it's very helpful for onboarding new board members because all board members are on a term cycle, 3-year term cycle. And so you're always having new members coming on every year. And so it's very helpful to have a grounding document that serves as our operating plan. And within that, we have recently updated our strategies for what we want to be strategically investing in and the purpose of that. And so our first strategy is to strengthen Working Land's business viability and the resiliency of those businesses, the ability to bounce back, the ability to adapt by providing access to capital. Our second strategy is to increase Working Land's businesses' knowledge, skills, and profitability by investing in an array of business support services. So we actually do grant making to technical assistance providers for the express purposes of working with businesses to strengthen their ability to be successful as businesses. We also have a strategy to increase investments and business supports to historically underserved and marginalized communities by reducing barriers to submitting successful grant applications. And we actually currently have an RFP out being circulated looking for a consultant to advise us on some questions around whether or not there's any inherent biases in our processes, the way in which we put out the RFPs. Are there any unintended barriers for underserved and marginalized communities in the way in which we practice what we do as a board? And there'll be some training provided to the board as well through that RFP process. And then finally, the strategy is to improve the operating environment of Vermont's agriculture and forest businesses by serving as a credible and trusted voice to raise awareness and collaborate with partners about laws, regulations, and policies that impact Working Land's businesses. So what this means is that when there are policies that we learn about that really negatively impact the working land sector, it provides the board with the ability to put together, say, a letter to a legislative committee to explain why we might suggest they consider a change to a particular statute or something like that. It gives the ability for us to as a board to look at that enabling environment that would enable businesses to really thrive in these sectors. Flowing then from the strategies, from our goals and our mission, our vision, mission, goals, and strategies, then we have a series of statewide indicators. And these have also been recently updated. We are actively gathering data from grantees on the number of acres that are in active forest and agricultural production, the number of active and forest enterprises in Vermont, the percent of total food purchased in Vermont annually that is locally sourced. Again, this is all part of grantee work that we're collecting, as well as looking at the larger macro level of how do the grantees fit within, for instance, the totality of all food system businesses. How are our grantees performing against the larger universe? Median income of workers employed in Vermont's ag and forest sectors, and then the total revenue and profitability of businesses in those two sectors. These are things that we are actively tracking. And just a couple of highlights over the period of 2012 to 2020 is that our grantees in total in aggregate employed a little over 1,000 people, benefited over 24,000 acres, created 539 jobs, and generated over 55 million in sales. Now that jobs number is not large relative to $18.8 million going out the door, you could argue, but as many of you probably know and experience this also in Maine, a lot of the businesses that we are investing in with state grant dollars are very small businesses. So it's a big win for them to add 1 or 2 more positions because that helps their business be more sustainable, able to access bigger markets and get more product out the door, for instance. So in aggregate, it doesn't add up to a huge number comparatively, like just in the food system alone, we have 64,000 workers, people employed in the private sector in the food system. But it's consequential to the businesses that we're funding in total. And then, like you all, our board, we have a 20-member board, is made up of representatives that represent different parts of the supply chains in the forest economy and in the food system. So I won't go over this because you all very much reflect this. And I think the Vermont statute very much influenced the makeup of your board in the final lining up of it. And then, as I mentioned, the other type, sort of official board members, and that's really in quotes because it's more of just saying these are the positions that where sometimes the people change, but the positions are really grounded in state government on some level. So our Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets, or designee, it serves as the chair. So our Deputy Secretary is the current chair of the board. The designee for the Deputy Secretary of Commerce and Community Development serves, and the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Rec, or their designee. Now, this is the first time in Vermont where these three entities in different parts of state government infrastructure have been put together on a board and given a pot of funding to be part of a process of doing grant making together. And I can tell you it has had significant impact on the workings and the relationships between these three entities within state government. So, for instance, we've had 2 years worth of flooding back to back, 2023 and 2024. Because of the relationship built between the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Commerce, when the state put a bunch of ARPA and leftover COVID era money into a specialized grant fund program in order to get out to businesses impacted by flooding, there was a carve out set aside that was negotiated for farms and food related businesses in this larger pool of funds. That I do not think would have happened had there not been this 12, 14-year history between the agencies of commerce and the agency of agriculture, for instance. So I can't understate this enough. The benefits of having the weaving and the relationship building between agencies to breaking down silos inside state government is huge. And then, as Eric said, we have 3 ex officio members. So the executive director of the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, that is a quasi-state agency that receives property transfer tax dollars every year to invest in affordable housing construction, as well as the conservation of farms and forest land. And then the head of the Vermont Economic Development Authority, which is basically like our state bank, is on the board. And then myself as the executive director of the Sustainable Jobs Fund. And why we were selected was because we also have state statute that created us back in 1995. So we are sort of this weird, we're a nonprofit, but we have state statute and state standing on some level. And so the idea here was that these ex officio members would provide subject matter expertise as well as continuity over time. So especially given that, you know, all of the other members, the appointed members all have 3-year terms, and you can serve for up to 3 3-year terms, but there is going to be a necessary turnover in those positions. And even when there's changes of administrations, you're going to have different secretaries, different commissioners. And so these 3 ex officio members, in essence, besides the subject matter expertise, provide for that continuity in that historical sense. So myself and the current designee for the Vermont Economic Development Authority are the only ones that have been on the board since the very beginning. And that historical knowledge is really important going forward. So I'll just mention a couple of the different grant types and the grant sizes so you get a sense of scale for us. We have a couple of different rounds of business grants, and those range from 15 to 250,000. It all depends, year over year, it all depends on how much funding we receive from the state legislature. So in years when we only receive $1 million, we aren't doing $250,000 grant making. We usually cap out at like 75,000 during those years, maybe 50,000. In years when we've had a couple, $3 million to give out, then we've been able to make a few very strategic, impactful $250,000 level grants. But these ones, there's grants that are given to individual small businesses in that 15 to 25 to $35,000 range that only impacts that individual business. And then we have supply chain impact and we have infrastructure impact grants, which are intended to go to a middle of the supply chain entity and then have that ripple effect to multiple other businesses that they support because they're in the middle of the supply chain. We also provide grants every year to service providers through the grants and contracts. And again, this is to be able to provide that risk mitigation to really strengthen the sector and the ability of businesses to be successful, to have that outside advising. We also sometimes do producer association grants. We have a number of producer associations. Most of them are very small. Some of them have staffs, many don't. But they are represent an important part of our providing supports to businesses in their particular association. And so there are times when, again, we have more funding, we're able to provide some specialized, focused funding support to producer associations. And then every year we also provide some trade show assistance grants, small amounts of money to allow food system businesses in particular to go to trade shows. I know I'm running close to out of time here, so I'll just move along. In terms of our application review and decision-making process, we do put out an RFP that's prepared by the staff that comes out after priorities have been determined by the board. We have a 2-day summer symposium where we are taking stock in what we understand the market needs are, what the business needs are, and then we're making decisions on how much money we want to allocate to each of these different grant types based on how much money we will have to work with. The RFPs are announced by staff. They conduct webinars for potential applicants to learn about the process and understand how to apply using our online portal. And as Eric said, we will have letters of intent for the business grants, not for the technical assistance providers. And it's very short, it's very straightforward. It's meant to be done very quickly so that the board can just get a sense, the staff can get a sense of who's thinking about applying. And then we have a grant review committee that looks those over. The staff assembles these committees based on subject matter experts and agency staff, and they review the LOIs, they get scored, and then the staff, the review committee and the board decide who they want to invite for full applications. Then we have a full application, which is a little bit more involved. And for the largest grants, it also includes that applicants have to include a business plan with the documents that they submit. We want to take a look at their multi-year projections to make sure that they, if they're going to be applying for a $250,000 grant, that they really have a well-baked project to have that money go towards. The grant review committees are assembled and they meet and recommend applicants to be funded to the full board. And then the staff assembles all of the in a master spreadsheet, all of the applicant scores, and then the board meets to review that work and make final decisions. And the board definitely is not a rubber stamp. We often take recommendations, but not always of what is recommended to us from those review committees. And then after that, the staff inform every applicant whether yes or no. If it's a no, they provide a lot of useful feedback about how to improve your application if you want to apply again, or why it was that it wasn't approved. Sometimes it's simply we had way too many good applications for the amount of funding that we had available. The staff prepares the grant applications and finalizes the awards, and then the staff and the board again get together in the summer for a 2-day symposium. And we invite in subject matter expertise, do that high-level review and gain some more intel, and then that informs the next round of grant making. The board meets monthly and has a whole cycle unto itself. So just a couple of quick slides on the impacts over the last 12 years worth of grant making. About 30% of all the grants have gone to two businesses, have gone to forest related businesses, and 70% to ag businesses. That may be something in Maine that is more 50-50 or even more preference to forestry because of the scale of your forest products sector. In Vermont, we have way more food businesses than we have forest products businesses. We think a lot about the size of the grant awards and having them spread out so that we have a good mixture of levels of investment. So here you can see where forest versus ag, the number of private sector grants and the percentage by award size. And again, these slides will be available to you so you can dig in a little bit more. The distribution of our grants, this just gives you a snapshot. Dairy and dairy products, we are the largest dairy state in the region, so it's not surprising that the largest percentage of our grant funds has gone to dairy and dairy products, but also significantly to livestock and meat products and produce, to wood pellet production, logging and sawmills. You can see the full range there, but we do track this over time and is reflective in many ways based on the size and scale of the industries and subsectors in Vermont. We also pay attention to the distribution geographically of grants. When you are getting all of your funding from the state legislature, you want to make sure politically that all of your counties are getting at least some money, because you want full support of the program. And if any certain areas are not being funded at all or not preferenced well enough compared to the size of activity happening there, you can bet we will hear about that. So we very much take a look at how we are geographically distributing funds. It's a, as we're making our final decisions, we always ask staff, like, okay, what's the geographic spread of what we think we're funding? And if there's, a couple of applications on the bubble and they're about the same, and we like them both, but one is in a county where there's no other funding going, we might decide to choose that one. So it is not, it's one of those screens, one of those tests that we sort of like pay attention to that might inform a decision-making in a given year or might not. And so I brought this up because in the last 7 years, it's been this way from the beginning, but we definitely get different funding levels every year. And it's really hard on the businesses that want to apply for these funds, because in the years when we get a very small amount of money, like, $500,000-$600,000, there's very few awards being made. And yet people are spending a lot of time putting together applications. And the years when we have a lot more to give out, you can see how it changes in terms of what's being requested. But from a business perspective, having a consistent amount of money at year over year is really, really helpful, because then you can plan accordingly. We've seen applications come to us where a project is half baked, but they hurry up to put something in, even though it's half baked, and they haven't really thought it through because they're worried that next year there wouldn't be enough money when their project was really ready. So it's really important to try to get the legislature to give consistent amounts of funding every year. And then just the last slide. This is the breakdown of grant awards between service providers and direct to enterprises. And again, the percentage changes year to year based on the amount of funding, but generally speaking, it's about 60-40%. So 60% going directly to businesses and 35 to 40% going to service provider who work directly with businesses. And what's important to know is that the service provider money, it's not just general support, like just to run your organization. It has to go directly to the folks that are working directly with businesses to support them. So this is, you can look at this later just to see sort of over time how things have changed. But we do very intentionally think about the percentage breakdown year over year. And a lot of that is informed by how much money we have to work with. So I will leave it at that because we are well over time. I'm sorry about that, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, that was great. Thank you. I think we can take a couple of questions. I do want to make sure we are a little over. I want to make sure that we're capturing everyone's questions. So even if we don't get to all of them, let's make sure that everyone's getting them down and getting them to us. Amy?
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time with this, so I can always follow up too, but I'm really curious when you talk about the annual appropriation from the legislature, if it's coming from a bill that like the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Foundation puts in, or if it's built into the budgets of the Ag Department of Ag and any other, but like economic development, do they build any into? So I'm just curious how that happens every
Yeah,
cycle.
good question. So basically our process is that because the administration of the fund is designated to the Agency of Agriculture, everything is flowing through their budget. So what they do is they put in a request to the governor's office in the fall. We run January through May as our normal legislative cycle. So in September, early September, they're doing their budget exercise. They submit a request. The governor's team then decides yes, no, up, down, like usually the agency puts in bigger requests than what the governor is willing to do. And then that goes to the legislature as part of the governor's recommended budget. And then the legislature either increases or keeps it usually at the level of what the governor puts in. So our strategy is always to try to get the agency to ask for as much as possible, but they're constrained by what their guidance is, right?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And I just wanted to really thank you. And Eric and Erica for being on and for going through all that is awesome.
Yeah, all of this is so helpful. I think what would be great then is if folks have, I know that, oh, do we want to ask? Craig has, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
can answer that question. One of the
Yeah.
things and around this sort of half-baked proposals, again, oftentimes what'll happen is we'll read something in the application. We're like, oh, there is something right here. We really like this, but it's not built out enough. It would really benefit from more time. So what we'll often do is we will reject those, but then we'll say, you would really benefit for going through our farm and forest viability program. And so then we get them hooked up and they spend a year working on their business plan, or they get in with an advisor who can help them to strengthen their concept, spend a bit more time like figuring out exactly what equipment they want to buy, come back the next year and apply. Doesn't mean we'll fund it, but what we've seen over and over again is when they do come back, it's a much better project and we're more likely to fund it.
Thank you. Ellen and Eric and Erica, thank you so much for all of this. Again, I think if folks have follow-up questions, or I know like Nicholas and Jeffrey, your questions weren't really fully answered. I think it would be great to get them in writing and send them out either in the chat or an email, and we can make sure we're getting all of those questions fully answered and continuing those conversations.
And Jody, feel free to send the board my email address. I'm completely happy to answer any questions or hop on the phone with anybody. Really want you guys to benefit from the challenges we've been through and also the successes we've had. And there's no reason to reinvent wheels. So if we can help streamline and leapfrog over and not make the same mistakes we made, happy to help you with that.
Exactly. Thank you so much. It's so helpful. Okay, I do think we probably should move on to the next agenda item. Thanks again to all of you for those presentations. We really appreciate your time. The next item on the agenda, Jody is going to walk us through some thoughts on future meetings and how we might move this work forward.
Great, thank you. You may recall, you've been receiving very large board packets, but you may recall the last two versions of the meeting schedule and draft meeting content included this idea of breaking you up starting next month into some sort of subgroup. And we hadn't even defined what those might be. We thought possibly by sector, forestry, food system, agriculture. And the more we thought about it, the more we sort of landed on that not making sense, because candidly, we haven't really given you an opportunity to have a conversation. And that's not been intentional. What has been intentional is wanting to give you a baseline body of information that you would all be drawing from in order to be making informed decisions about the structure of the fund. And so that has required time, and it's required, frankly, all of the time that we've had for meetings. And so that's really been the structure of the last 3 meetings. There will continue to be some presentations at future meetings, not the next one, but as Erica Campbell laid out, In Common Group is going to continue to produce some work products that we'll be sharing with you in future months. And those will logically require oral presentation as well to walk through those, but they won't take up the body of the meetings. And so what we really thought made sense instead, and what we tried to lay out in page 10 of your meeting packet, and I can share my screen in a moment, is to keep you all together so that you actually start getting to know one another and start hearing one another's perspectives on these issues. Now, as you also noted, my follow-up email talked about individual interviews, and many of you have begun to sign up for that. So you'll have 2 types of opportunities. One is to really just share your individual perspective through interview, actually 3 opportunities. Also responding to the surveys that we provided you links to in the meeting packet. But so those would be sort of individual opportunities to express your opinions, but really, ultimately, you're going to be needing to function as a group and making group decisions. And so we really want to structure future meetings in that way. So in revising, and I think this will continue to be somewhat revised as we learn at each meeting, I'll share my screen and we'll just like walk through this quickly. And let me know if you're seeing anything yet. No? Not yet. Okay, hold on. How's that?
That's great.
Okay. So what we're suggesting here is just try and expand that a little bit. We're at April, as you see, and if you look at all of the meetings prior to that and this meeting, it's basically all presentation. What we'd like to do is next meeting shift to, there won't be a new report to present to you at the next meeting. So we really want to go back to the initial information that you've been provided. Give you a meeting packet that includes the funding landscape report again, the AIIP slides that Claire presented last month again, the 4 or 5 pages of RFSI data that were included in this most recent packet again, and the forestry presentation that Matt just gave. And really just have you be able to have a conversation about that talks about what you're drawing from that information. Are there sort of salient points, key issues that you want to make sure are drawn forward from that information? What I will likely do as well, we need to talk about this with the co-chairs at our follow-up meeting in a few days, but I think what would likely be most helpful is to get that information back out to you soon and give you an opportunity to think about it on your own and provide, by way of homework, some feedback to us in the next week or so about key things that you feel were really important points from that information. We then, as staff, can assemble that information and share that back out to you in the next meeting packet, so that would form kind of the starting point of your conversation for May. We would then tentatively follow that same format for subsequent meetings for the next few, where in June, there would be further discussion, but of additional information that you have already received, the benchmarking report in particular. By that point, In Common Group will have analyzed the surveys and we'll either present on that or we'll have that will sort of be brought into the conversation of what we're learning from those surveys. Similarly, in July, another facilitated conversation, but a new body of information that we would have by that point is an analysis of all the interviews that In Common Group did with all of you, or those of you who are interested, and a few others that where there are gaps in expertise. At that point, it will be staff's job to start coming up with an initial outline of the fund structure. And you'll see that at least 2 meetings, probably 3, there would then be an opportunity for you to circle back to this fund structure, revise it, provide feedback on it, so that we continue to shape it in a way that feels right to all of you. So we're envisioning that you would see several iterations of a fund design. Where I've highlighted a couple of things, there is, some value potentially in having public comment on that fairly well-baked draft by the time August comes around. That requires some weeks to do and to synthesize feedback that's received by public comment. And so that's why you see a number of highlighted areas of, do we want to then extend sort of the decision-making timeline to include an October meeting, which was not in your calendar originally. And rather than trying to approve a final plan in September, do that in October to provide more, a little bit more space for public input. So it doesn't change the overall timeline for creating draft rules, but it does mean that October may not be a month off from the board's perspective. I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment so that because you have this information in your board packet as well, again on page 10, but there are some specific questions that it would be helpful for us to get your feedback on, but I also want to hear more generally, does this overall plan feel like it makes sense to you? The specifics are, if you like this plan, are you okay with an October meeting that was not originally on your books? That's number 1. There are 3 other questions. If you did have an October meeting, would it make sense to move your in-person fall meeting from September to October so that you're finalizing the fund design in person? The third is, are you comfortable extending in-person meetings by half an hour? And then finally, a logistical question about, there has been some conversation about offering a visit to an AIIP site the mornings of your in-person meetings. So those are the specifics, but I really just want to open up generally to kind of conceptually how you feel about all this. Sarah.
I'm going to throw another wrench into this and ask, would it make sense for us to meet in person in May rather than June and kick that off? I don't have answers to your other questions either.
Yeah.
Just add it on to us.
It's certainly possible on our end to organize that. I think it's probably most important to get others' perspectives on that. What that would do is, yeah, I mean, there's some logic to that, in that if you're having your first conversation about, just perspectives on everything that you've heard, you're doing that face to face.
Thank you, Ellen.
September 24th is Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, any other thoughts about that? The idea of in-person May meeting?
Yeah, I like that idea personally. I'm wondering, I feel like we would need to check with our co-chair too, Senator Hickman, because I'm not sure um, if he could make that one, but we can find out.
And June 25th, yeah. The only thing I recall us talking about is, since we hadn't considered doing an in-person meeting before June, was that there was the possibility that the legislature might still be in session on June 25th. So if we're going to have an in-person meeting, then let's make sure it's in Augusta. So I would think that the same principle would apply in May, but whether there's kind of more activity in late May than late June, that's a possibility. Legislative activity, if you will.
Any other strong feelings either way on that one question? I know, Amy, I feel like you mentioned in the last meeting that you couldn't make the June in-person meeting. I don't know if you still would have a conflict for May.
Can only be remote in June, but I'm supposed to be, we're not hitting it great. It's not about me though, but I'm probably away that week in May too. But that's, maybe I can get Bradley to come or something like that. So yeah, I just don't want to miss the time to be with everybody and to be really thinking through this. But happy to be flexible.
One other point that was made by Erica that I think is valuable here is that there will not be any presentation in May because there won't be a new report done by then. And so it would mean that there would be more time for discussion in May. So barring major objection, I'm inclined to try to make that happen and see if we can find a meeting room and pivot in that way. If there are major objections, maybe now's the time to voice them.
And will that be, sorry, Jody, but just to clarify, so if we do in person in May, there won't be a remote option at all?
No, for in-person meetings, I think we always will have there will always be a remote option.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it will potentially be a 3-hour meeting. That was the other question, right, Jody?
No, I think the only thing that we ever considered was extending it to 2.5 hours.
For the in-person meetings, though, we've talked about extending those, right?
Yes, extending them to 3 o'clock, a 12:30 start to a 3 o'clock end. So, so turning what is now a standard 2-hour meeting into a 2.5-hour meeting.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, the longest time we would keep you is 2.5 in person. Yeah, okay. All right, so let's work on that. Then October meeting, giving us more space to potentially get public input through a public input period. It doesn't extend the timeline, but it does add a meeting into your schedule, and it would be on the same day of the month as we have chosen for the other months. Major objections there? Okay, I'm going to add that in then. Then I think lastly is appetite for us identifying a AIIP funded project that's within reasonable proximity to your in-person meetings and arranging a visit for one or more of those if they're close by those days. Something that you'd likely want to do, not have time for because life is crazy. I'm seeing Melissa nod, but I wasn't sure which of those points you were nodding to.
I'm not going to be able to do a site visit, but happy to make the meeting.
Okay, no problem. Life is crazy. No.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm sensing lukewarm on this.
Yeah, that's what I'm sensing too.
Yeah, that's fine. Totally fine. And maybe I wasn't, so we would shift the in-person meeting from September to October. And keep it in the Bangor area. So find a location in Bangor for October. Okay. So then what you could expect from us would be a packet of information as soon as possible, all of which you've seen before, other than, well, that you will have seen even today in the form of some of the slide decks. All of this is information you will have heard about before. And we'll have a few questions for you to respond to. Something about, what are some key takeaways that you're getting from this information? We'll ask you to send that back to us. We will synthesize it. That will be the starting point and part of your meeting packet for the May meeting that will kind of kick off your discussion. I think I've got what I need. Do you have questions about process? Great. Thank you all.
We just covered everything that was supposed to be at the end of the meeting there. So now we're suddenly ahead of schedule. Is it well, any other questions about this or concerns with like the idea of not breaking out into subgroups, any concerns around that? Is everyone feeling, Melissa, did you have anything? Okay. Oh, okay. And then Shannon says she would be happy to give a success story or tour. We can talk about that as well. Okay, so I think we're all set. Our next meeting then is May 28th in person, unless we somehow between in the next couple of days realize that will not work. So we can follow up about that. Is it too soon to see if there's any, do we have any public comment? Anyone tracking that, Craig or Jody or Tom? I guess that's you, Tom.
We have two public attendees, Ben Grant and Bradley Russell. And if they could raise their hands if they're interested. Not seeing any response on that.
Okay, great. The only other thing I would say, if there are any last minute, I know Erica and Eric are still here. So if there are any, since we have a few extra minutes, if there are any follow-up questions for them that people want to bring up now, we have time for that. Seems like people are happy to wrap up early. That's okay. That's okay. Again, I think follow up with any questions that you do have. We can make sure that we're getting answers to those. And somehow, miraculously, we are ending early. I don't know how that happened. It felt very tight for a while. So anything else, Jody?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
You'll hear from me soon.
Okay. Thank you all again. This was a really great conversation and looking forward to seeing you all in person.
Thank you.
Okay. See you later.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.